The History of the Third Calendar by Anonymous. My story, O honorable lady, differs from those you have already heard. The two princes who have spoken before me have each lost an eye by events beyond their own control, but I lost mine through my own fault. My name is Ajib. I am the son of a sultan. After his death, I took possession of his dominions and continued in the city where he had resided. My kingdom is composed of several fine provinces upon the mainland, besides a number of valuable islands. My first object was to visit the provinces. I afterward caused my whole fleet to be fitted out, and went to my islands to gain the hearts of my subjects by my presence, and to confirm them in their loyalty. These voyages gave me some taste for navigation, in which I took so much pleasure that I resolved to make some discoveries beyond my own territories, to which end I caused 10 ships to be fitted out, embarked, and set sail. 79. Our voyage was very pleasant for 40 days successively, but on the 41st night the wind became contrary, and so boisterous that we were nearly lost. I gave orders to steer back to my own coast, but I perceived at the same time that my pilot knew not where we were. Upon the 10th day, a seaman, being sent to look out for land from the masthead, gave notice that he could see nothing but sky and sea, but that right ahead he perceived a great blackness. The pilot changed color at this account, and throwing his turban on the deck with one hand and beating his breast with the other, cried, "Oh, sir, we are all lost, not one of us can escape, and with all my skill it is not in my power to effect our deliverance." I asked him what reason he had thus to despair. He exclaimed, "The tempest has brought us so far out of our course that tomorrow about noon we shall be near the Black Mountain, or mine of adamant, which at this very minute draws all your fleet toward it by virtue of the iron in your ships. And when we approach within a certain distance, the attraction of the adamant will have such force that all the nails will be drawn out of the sides and bottoms of the ships, and fastened to the mountain, so that your vessels will fall to pieces and sink. This mountain," continued the pilot, "is inaccessible. On the summit there is a dome of fine brass, supported by pillars of the same metal, and on the top of that dome stands a horse, likewise of brass, with a rider on his back, who has a plate of lead fixed to his breast, upon which some talismanic characters are engraved. Sir, the tradition is that this statue is the chief cause why so many ships and men have been lost 80 and sunk in this place, and that it will ever continue to be fatal to all those who have the misfortune to approach, until it shall be thrown down." The pilot, having finished his discourse, began to weep afresh, and all the rest of the ship's company did the same, and they took farewell of each other. The next morning we distinctly perceived the Black Mountain. About noon we were so near that we found what the pilot had foretold to be true, for all the nails and iron in the ships flew toward the mountain, where they fixed, by the violence of the attraction, with a horrible noise. The ships split asunder, and their cargoes sank into the sea. All my people were drowned, but God had mercy on me and permitted me to save myself by means of a plank, which the wind drove ashore just at the foot of the mountain. I did not receive the least hurt, and my good fortune brought me to a landing place where there were steps that led up to the summit of the mountain. At last I reached the top without accident. I went into the dome and, kneeling on the ground, gave God thanks for his mercies. I passed the night under the dome. In my sleep an old grave man appeared to me and said, "Hearken, Ajib, as soon as thou art awake, dig up the ground under thy feet. Thou wilt find a bow of brass and 3 arrows of lead. Shoot the 3 arrows at the statue, and the rider and his horse will fall into the sea. This being done, the sea will swell and rise to the foot of the dome. When it has come so high, thou wilt perceive a boat, with one man holding an oar in each hand. This man is 81 also of metal, but different from that thou hast thrown down. Step on board, but without mentioning the name of God, and let him conduct thee. He will in 10 days' time bring thee into another sea, where thou shalt find an opportunity to return to thy country, provided, as I have told thee, thou dost not mention the name of God during the whole voyage." When I awoke, I felt much comforted by the vision, and did not fail to observe everything that the old man had commanded me. I took the bow and arrows out of the ground, shot at the horseman, and with the 3rd arrow I overthrew him and the horse. In the meantime the sea swelled and rose up by degrees. When it came as high as the foot of the dome upon the top of the mountain, I saw, afar off, a boat rowing toward me, and I returned God thanks. When the boat made land, I stepped aboard, and took great heed not to pronounce the name of God, neither spoke I one word. I sat down, and the man of metal began to row off from the mountain. He rowed without ceasing till the 9th day, when I saw some islands, which gave me hopes that I should escape all the danger that I feared. The excess of my joy made me forget what I was forbidden. God is great, God be praised, said I. I had no sooner spoken than the boat and man sank, casting me upon the sea. I swam until night, when, as my strength began to fail, a wave vast as a mountain threw me on the land. The first thing I did was to strip, and to dry my clothes. The next morning, I went forward to discover what sort of country I was in. I had not walked far before I 82 found I was upon a desert, though a very pleasant island, abounding with trees and wild shrubs bearing fruit. I recommended myself to God, and prayed him to dispose of me according to his will. Immediately after, I saw a vessel coming from the mainland before the wind, directly toward the island. I got up into a very thick tree, from whence, though unseen, I might safely view them. The vessel came into a little creek, where 10 slaves landed, carrying a spade and other instruments for digging up the ground. They went toward the middle of the island, where they dug for a considerable time, after which they lifted up a trapdoor. They returned again to the vessel and unloaded several sorts of provisions and furniture, which they carried to the place where they had been digging. They then descended into a subterranean dwelling. I saw them once more go to the ship, and return soon after with an old man who led a handsome lad of about 15 years of age. They all descended when the trapdoor had been opened. After they had again come up, they let down the trapdoor, covered it over with earth, and returned to the creek where the ship lay, but I saw not the young man in their company. This made me believe that he had stayed behind in the subterranean cavern. The old man and the slaves went on board and steered their course toward the mainland. When I perceived they had proceeded to such a distance that I could not be seen by them, I came down from the tree and went directly to the place where I had seen the ground broken. I removed the earth by degrees till I came to a stone 2 or 3 feet square. I lifted it up and found 83 that it covered the head of a flight of stairs, also of stone. I descended, and at the bottom found myself in a large room, brilliantly lighted and furnished with a carpet, a couch covered with tapestry and cushions of rich stuff, upon which the young man sat. The young man, when he perceived me, was considerably alarmed, but I made a low obeisance and said to him, "Sir, do not fear. I am a king, and I will do you no harm. On the contrary, it is probable that your good destiny may have brought me hither to deliver you out of this tomb, where it seems you have been buried alive. But what surprises me, for you must know that I have seen all that hath passed since your coming into this island, is that you suffered yourself to be entombed in this place without any resistance." The young man, much assured at these words, with a smiling countenance requested me to seat myself by him. As soon as I was seated, he said, "Prince, my story will surprise you. My father is a jeweler. He has many slaves and also agents at the several courts, which he furnishes with precious stones. He had been long married without having issue when he dreamed that he should have a son, though his life would be but short. Some time after, I was born, which occasioned great joy in the family. My father, who had observed the very moment of my birth, consulted astrologers about my nativity, and was answered, 'Your son shall live happily till the age of 15, when his life will be exposed to a danger which he will hardly be able to escape. But if his good destiny preserve him beyond that time, he will live to a great age. It will be,' said they, 'when the statue of brass that stands upon the summit of the 84 mountain of adamant shall be thrown into the sea by Prince Ajib, and, as the stars prognosticate, your son will be killed 50 days afterward by that prince.' My father took all imaginable care of my education until this year, which is the 15th of my age. He had notice given him yesterday that the statue of brass had been thrown into the sea about 10 days ago. This news alarmed him much, and in consequence of the prediction of the astrologers, he took the precaution to form this subterranean habitation to hide me in during the 50 days after the throwing down of the statue, and therefore, as it is 10 days since this happened, he came hastily hither to conceal me, and promised at the end of 40 days to return and fetch me away. For my own part, I am sanguine in my hopes, and cannot believe that Prince Ajib will seek for me in a place underground, in the midst of a desert island. He had scarcely done speaking when I said to him, with great joy, "Dear sir, trust in the goodness of God and fear nothing. I will not leave you till the 40 days have expired, of which the foolish astrologers have made you apprehensive, and in the meanwhile I will do you all the service in my power, after which, with leave of your father and yourself, I shall have the benefit of getting to the mainland in your vessel, and when I am returned into my kingdom, I will remember the obligations I owe you and endeavor to demonstrate my gratitude by suitable acknowledgments." This discourse encouraged the jeweler's son and inspired him with confidence. I took care not to inform him I was the very Ajib whom he dreaded, lest I should alarm his fears. I found the young man of ready wit, 85, and partook with him of his provisions, of which he had enough to have lasted beyond the 40 days, though he had had more guests than myself. In short, madam, we spent 39 days in this subterranean abode in the pleasantest manner possible. The 40th day appeared, and in the morning, when the young man awoke, he said to me, with a transport of joy that he could not restrain, "Prince, this is the 40th day, and I am not dead, thanks to God and your good company. My father will not fail to make you, very shortly, every acknowledgment of his gratitude for your attentions, and will furnish you with every necessary for your return to your kingdom. But," continued he, "while we are waiting his arrival, dear Prince, pray do me the favor to fetch me a melon and some sugar, 23, that I may eat some to refresh me." Out of several melons that remained, I took the best and laid it on a plate, and as I could not find a knife to cut it with, I asked the young man if he knew where there was one. "There is one," said he, "upon this cornice over my head." I accordingly saw it there, and made so much haste to reach it that, while I had it in my hand, my foot being entangled in the carpet, I fell most unhappily upon the young man, and the knife pierced his heart. At this spectacle I cried out with agony. I beat my head, my face, my breast, I tore my clothes, I threw myself on the ground with unspeakable sorrow and grief. I would have embraced death without any reluctance had it presented itself to me. But what we wish, whether it be good or evil, will not always happen according to our desire. Nevertheless, considering that all my tears and sorrows would not restore the young man to life, and the 40 days being expired, I might be surprised by his father, I quitted the subterranean dwelling, laid down the great stone upon the entrance, and covered it with earth. I again ascended into the tree which had previously sheltered me, when I saw the expected vessel approaching the shore. The old man with his slaves landed immediately and advanced toward the subterranean dwelling, with a countenance that showed some hope. But when they saw the earth had been newly removed, they changed color, particularly the old man. They lifted up the stone and descended the stairs. They called the young man by his name, but no answer was returned. Their fears redoubled. They searched about, and at last found him stretched on his couch, with the knife through his heart, for I had not had the courage to draw it out. On seeing this, they uttered such lamentable cries that my tears flowed afresh. The unfortunate father continued a long while insensible, and made them more than once despair of his life, but at last he came to himself. The slaves then brought up his son's body, dressed in his best apparel, and when they had made a grave, they buried it. The old man, supported by 2 slaves, and his face covered with tears, threw the first earth upon the body, after which the slaves filled up the grave. This being done, all the furniture was brought up, 87, and with the remaining provisions, put on board the vessel. The old man, overcome with sorrow, was carried upon a litter to the ship, which stood out to sea, and in a short time was out of sight. After the old man and his slaves were gone, I was left alone upon the island. I lay that night in the subterranean dwelling, which they had shut up, and when the day came, I walked round the island. I led this wearisome life for a whole month. At the expiration of this time, I perceived that the sea had sunk so low that there remained between me and the continent but a small stream, which I crossed, and the water did not reach above the middle of my leg. At last I got upon more firm ground. When I had proceeded some distance from the sea, I saw a good way before me something that resembled a great fire, which afforded me some comfort. For I said to myself, I shall here find some persons, it not being possible that this fire should kindle of itself. As I drew nearer, however, I found my error, and discovered that what I had taken for a fire was a castle of red copper, which the beams of the sun made to appear at a distance like flames. As I wondered at this magnificent building, I saw 10 handsome young men coming along, but what surprised me was that they were all blind of the right eye. They were accompanied by an old man, very tall, and of a venerable aspect. As I was conjecturing by what adventure these men could come together, they approached and seemed glad to see me. After we had made our salutations, they inquired what had brought me thither. I told them my story, which filled them with great astonishment. 88. After I had concluded my account, the young men prayed me to accompany them into the palace, and brought me into a spacious hall, where there were 10 small blue sofas set round, separate from one another. In the middle of this circle stood an 11th sofa, not so high as the rest, but of the same color, upon which the old man before mentioned sat down, and the young men occupied the other 10. But as each sofa could only contain one man, one of the young men said to me, "Sit down, friend, upon that carpet in the middle of the room, and do not inquire into anything that concerns us, nor the reason why we are all blind of the right eye." The old man, having sat a short time, arose and went out, but he returned in a minute or two, brought in supper, distributed to each man separately his proportion, and likewise brought me mine, which I ate apart, as the rest did. And when supper was almost ended, he presented to each of us a cup of wine. One of the young men, observing that it was late, said to the old man, "You do not bring us that with which we may acquit ourselves of our duty." At these words, the old man arose, and went into a closet, and brought out thence upon his head 10 basins, one after another, all covered with black stuff. He placed one before every gentleman, together with a light. They uncovered their basins, which contained ashes and powdered charcoal. They mixed all together, and rubbed and bedaubed their faces with it, and having thus blackened themselves, they wept and lamented, beating their heads and breasts, and crying continually, "This is the fruit of our idleness and curiosity." They continued this strange employment nearly the 89 whole of the night. I wished 1,000 times to break the silence which had been imposed upon me, and to ask the reason of their strange proceedings. The next day, soon after we had arisen, we went out to walk, and then I said to them, "I cannot forbear asking why you bedaubed your faces with black, how it has happened that each of you has but one eye. I conjure you to satisfy my curiosity." One of the young men answered on behalf of the rest, "Once more, we advise you to restrain your curiosity. It will cost you the loss of your right eye." "No matter," I replied. "Be assured that if such a misfortune befall me, I will not impute it to you, but to myself." He further represented to me that when I had lost an eye, I must not hope to remain with them, if I were so disposed, because their number was complete, and no addition could be made to it. I begged them, let it cost what it would, to grant my request. The 10 young men, perceiving that I was so fixed in my resolution, took a sheep, killed it, and after they had taken off the skin, presented me with a knife, telling me it would be useful to me on an occasion, which they would soon explain. "We must sew you in this skin," said they, "and then leave you, upon which a bird of monstrous size, called a roc, will appear in the air, and taking you for a sheep, will pounce upon you and soar with you to the sky. But let not that alarm you. He will descend with you again and lay you on the top of a mountain. When you find yourself on the ground, cut the skin with your knife and throw it off. As soon as the roc sees you, he will fly away for fear and leave 90 you at liberty. Do not stay, but walk on till you come to a spacious palace, covered with plates of gold, large emeralds, and other precious stones. Go up to the gate, which always stands open, and walk in. We have each of us been in that castle, but will tell you nothing of what we saw or what befell us there. You will learn by your own experience. All that we can inform you is that it has cost each of us our right eye, and the penance which you have been witness to is what we are obliged to observe in consequence of having been there, but we cannot explain ourselves further." When the young man had thus spoken, I wrapped myself in the sheep's skin, holding fast to the knife which was given me, and after the young men had been at the trouble to sew the skin about me, they retired into the hall and left me alone. The roc they spoke of soon arrived. He pounced upon me, took me in his talons like a sheep, and carried me up to the summit of the mountain. When I found myself on the ground, I cut the skin with the knife, and throwing it off, the roc at the sight of me flew away. This roc is a white bird of a monstrous size. His strength is such that he can lift up elephants from the plains and carry them to the tops of mountains, where he feeds upon them. Being impatient to reach the palace, I lost no time, but made so much haste that I got thither in half a day's journey, and I must say that I found it surpassed the description they had given me of its magnificence. The gate being open, I entered a square court, so large that there were around it 99 gates of sandalwood and wood of aloes, and one of gold, without 91 reckoning those of several superb staircases that led to apartments above, besides many more which I could not see. I saw a door standing open just before me, through which I entered into a large hall. Here I found 40 young women, of such perfect beauty as imagination could not surpass. They were all most sumptuously apparelled. As soon as they saw me they arose, and without waiting my salutations, said to me, with tones of joy, "Welcome. Welcome, we have long expected you. You are at present our Lord, Master, and Judge, and we are your slaves, ready to obey your commands." After these words were spoken, these ladies vied with each other in their eager solicitude to do me all possible service. One brought hot water to wash my feet. A second poured sweet-scented water on my hands. Others brought me all kinds of necessaries and change of apparel. Others again brought in a magnificent collation. And the rest came, with glasses in their hands, to pour me delicious wines, all in good order and in the most charming manner possible. Some of the ladies brought in musical instruments and sang most delightful songs, while others danced before me, two and two, with admirable grace. In short, honored madam, I must tell you that I passed a whole year of most pleasurable life with these 40 ladies. At the end of that time I was greatly surprised to see these ladies with great sorrow impressed upon their countenances, and to hear them all say, "Adieu, dear prince, adieu, for we must leave you." After they had spoken these words, they began to weep bitterly. 92. "My dear ladies," said I, "have the kindness not to keep me any longer in suspense. Tell me the cause of your sorrow." "Well," said one of them, "to satisfy you, we must acquaint you that we are all princesses, daughters of kings. We live here together in the manner you have seen, but at the end of every year we are obliged to be absent 40 days, for reasons we are not permitted to reveal, and afterward we return again to this palace. Before we depart, we will leave you the keys of everything, especially those of the 100 doors, where you will find enough to satisfy your curiosity and to relieve your solitude during our absence. But we entreat you to forbear opening the golden door, for if you do, we shall never see you again, and the apprehension of this augments our grief." We separated with much tenderness, and after I had embraced them all they departed, and I remained alone in the castle. I determined not to forget the important advice they had given me, not to open the golden door. But as I was permitted to satisfy my curiosity in everything else, I took the first of the keys of the other doors, which were hung in regular order. I opened the first door and entered an orchard, which I believe the universe could not equal. I could not imagine anything to surpass it. The symmetry, the neatness, the admirable order of the trees, the abundance and diversity of unknown fruits, their freshness and beauty delighted me. Nor must I neglect to inform you that this delightful garden was watered in a most singular manner. Small channels, cut out with great art and 93 regularity, and of different lengths, carried water in considerable quantities to the roots of such trees as required much moisture. Others conveyed it in smaller quantities to those whose fruits were already formed. Some carried still less, to those whose fruits were swelling, and others carried only so much as was just requisite to water those which had their fruits come to perfection and only wanted to be ripened. They far exceeded in size the ordinary fruits in our gardens. I shut the door and opened the next. Instead of an orchard, I found here a flower garden, which was no less extraordinary in its kind. The roses, jessamines, violets, daffodils, hyacinths, anemones, tulips, pinks, lilies, and an infinite number of flowers, which do not grow in other places except at certain times, were there flourishing all at once, and nothing could be more delicious than the fragrant smell which they emitted. I opened the third door and found a large aviary, paved with marble of several fine and uncommon colors. The trellis work was made of sandalwood and wood of aloes. It contained a vast number of nightingales, goldfinches, canary birds, larks, and other rare singing birds, and the vessels that held their seed were of the most sparkling jasper or agate. The sun went down, and I retired, charmed with the chirping notes of the multitude of birds, who then began to perch upon such places as suited them for repose during the night. I went to my chamber, resolving on the following days to open all the rest of the doors, excepting that of gold. The next day I opened the fourth door. I entered a large court, surrounded with 40 gates, all open, and through each of them was an entrance into a treasury. 94 the first was stored with heaps of pearls, and what is almost incredible, the number of those stones which are most precious, and as large as pigeons' eggs, exceeded the number of those of the ordinary size. In the second treasury, 24 there were diamonds, carbuncles, and rubies, in the third, emeralds, in the fourth, ingots of gold, in the fifth, money, in the sixth, ingots of silver, and in the two following, money. The rest contained amethysts, chrysolites, topazes, opals, turquoises, agate, jasper, cornelian, and coral, of which there was a storehouse filled, not only with branches, but whole trees. Thus I went through, day by day, these various wonders. 39 days afforded me but just as much time as was necessary to open 99 doors, and to admire all that presented itself to my view, so that there was only the 100th door left, which I was forbidden to open. The 40th day after the departure of those charming princesses arrived, and had I but retained so much self-command as I ought to have had, I should have been this day the happiest of all mankind, whereas now I am the most unfortunate. But through my weakness, which I shall ever repent, and the temptations of an evil spirit, I opened that fatal door. But before I had moved my foot to enter, a smell, pleasant enough but too powerful for my senses, made me faint away. However, I soon recovered. But instead of taking warning from 95 this incident to close the door and restrain my curiosity, I entered and found myself in a spacious vaulted apartment, illuminated by several large tapers placed in candlesticks of solid gold. Among the many objects that attracted my attention was a black horse, of the most perfect symmetry and beauty. I approached in order the better to observe him, and found he had on a saddle and bridle of massive gold, curiously wrought. One part of his manger was filled with clean barley, and the other with rose water. I laid hold of his bridle, and led him out to view him by daylight. I mounted, and endeavored to make him move, but finding he did not stir, I struck him with a switch I had taken up in his magnificent stable. He had no sooner felt the whip than he began to neigh in a most horrible manner, and extending wings, which I had not before perceived, flew up with me into the air. My thoughts were fully occupied in keeping my seat, and considering the fear that had seized me, I sat well. At length he directed his course toward the earth, and lighting upon the terrace of a palace, without giving me time to dismount, he shook me out of the saddle with such force as to throw me behind him, and with the end of his tail he struck out my eye. Thus it was I became blind of one eye. I then recollected the predictions of the 10 young gentlemen. The horse again took wing and soon disappeared. I got up, much vexed at the misfortune I had brought upon myself. I walked upon the terrace, covering my eye with one of my hands, for it pained me exceedingly, and then descended and entered into a hall. I soon discovered, by the 10 sofas in a circle and the 11th 96 in the middle, lower than the rest, that I was in the castle whence I had been carried by the rock. The 10 young men seemed not at all surprised to see me, nor at the loss of my eye, but said, "We are sorry that we cannot congratulate you on your return as we could wish, but we are not the cause of your misfortune." "I should do you wrong," I replied, "to lay it to your charge. I have only myself to accuse." "If," said they, "it be a subject of consolation to the afflicted to know that others share their sufferings, you have in us this alleviation of your misfortune. All that has happened to you, we also have endured. We each of us tasted the same pleasures during a year, and we had still continued to enjoy them had we not opened the golden door when the princesses were absent. You have been no wiser than we, and have incurred the same punishment. We would gladly receive you into our company, to join with us in the penance to which we are bound, the duration of which we know not. But we have already stated to you the reasons that render this impossible. Depart, therefore, and proceed to the court of Baghdad, 25, where you will meet with the person who is to decide your destiny." After they had explained to me the road I was to travel, I departed. On the road I caused my beard and eyebrows to be shaven and assumed a calender's habit. I have had a long journey, but at last I arrived this evening and met these my brother calendars at the gate, being strangers as 97 well as myself. We were mutually surprised at one another to see that we were all blind of the same eye, but we had not leisure to converse long on the subject of our misfortunes. We have only had time enough to bring us hither to implore those favors which you have been generously pleased to grant us." The third calendar, having finished this relation of his adventures, Zobeide addressed him and his fellow calendars thus: "Go wherever you think proper, you are at liberty." But one of them answered, "Madam, we beg you to pardon our curiosity and permit us to hear the stories of your other guests who have not yet spoken." Then the lady turned to the Caliph, the Vizier Ja'afar and Mesra, and said to them, "It is now your turn to relate your adventures, therefore speak." The Grand Vizier, who had all along been the spokesman, answered Zobeide, "Madam, in order to obey you, we need only repeat what we have already said to the fair lady who opened for us the door. We are merchants come to Baghdad to sell our merchandise, which lies in the Khan 26, where we lodge. We dined today with several other persons of our condition at a merchant's house of this city, who, after he had treated us with choice dainties and excellent wines, sent for men and women dancers and musicians. The great noise we made brought in the watch, who arrested some of the company, 98, but we had the good fortune to escape. But it being already late, and the door of our Khan shut up, we knew not whither to retire. We chanced, as we passed along this street, to hear music at your house, which made us determine to knock at your gate. This is all the account that we can give you in obedience to your commands." "Well then," said Zobeide, "you shall all be equally obliged to me. I pardon you all, provided you immediately depart." Zobeide having given this command, the Caliph, the Vizier, Mesra, the three calendars, and the porter departed, for the presence of the 7 slaves with their weapons awed them into silence. As soon as they had quitted the house, and the gate was closed after them, the Caliph said to the calendars, without making himself known, "You, gentlemen, who are newly come to town, which way do you design to go, since it is not yet day?" "It is this," they replied, "that perplexes us." "Follow us," resumed the Caliph, "and we will convey you out of danger." He then whispered to the Vizier, "Take them along with you, and tomorrow morning bring them to me." The Vizier Ja'afar took the 3 calendars along with him, the porter went to his quarters, and the Caliph and Mesra returned to the palace. On the following morning, as the day dawned, the Sultan Harun al-Rashid arose and went to his council chamber and sat upon his throne. The Grand Vizier entered soon after and made his obeisance. "Vizier," said the Caliph, "go, bring those ladies and the calendars at the same time, make haste, and remember that I impatiently expect your return." 99. The Vizier, who knew his master's quick and fiery temper, hastened to obey, and conducted them to the palace with so much expedition that the Caliph was much pleased. When the ladies had arrived, the Caliph turned toward them and said, "I was last night in your house, disguised in a merchant's habit, but I am at present Harun al-Rashid, the 5th Caliph of the glorious house of Abbas, and hold the place of our great prophet. I have sent for you only to know who you are, and to ask for what reason one of you, after severely whipping the 2 black dogs, wept with them, and I am no less curious to know why another of you has her bosom so full of scars." Upon hearing these words, Zobeide thus related her story.